I think BYD have hit the nail on the head and have just shown how good they are when it comes to automotive manufacturing. To be able to make a full battery EV of this quality with this many features in it for $10,000 US, for sale for $10,000 US, is absolutely astonishing.
A new car just went on sale in China for $9,100. Not used, not a golf cart, a real, four-door, highway-legal electric car with a 1.4-inch touchscreen and a 250-mile range. Meanwhile, in America, the average new vehicle now costs $51,400. And if you want the truck sitting in your neighbor's driveway, the Ford F-150, you're looking at $40,000 to $80,000, depending on how many gadgets you want bolted onto it. That's not a typo. That's not a stripped-down concept car. China is selling real cars for the price of a used Honda Civic. So how did this happen? How does one country build an EV for $9,000 while another country can't build one for under $40,000? By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why and why it might be the biggest problem Detroit has faced in 100 years. Let's put that price tag in perspective, because $9,000 doesn't really land until you compare it to things you already know. The average used car in America used, not new sells, for around $26,000. That's still nearly triple the price of this brand new Chinese EV. This isn't cheap the way a stripped down rental car is cheap. It's cheap the way a smartphone is cheap, mass-produced, subsidized by scale, and sold at a price that makes older competitors look like they're overcharging on purpose.
The BYD Seagull is the best-selling EV, indeed the best-selling car of any kind here in China. Or at least it was, until this came along, the Geely Geom Xingyuan.
Here's the thing that should worry American automakers. This isn't one weird, cheap car from one weird, cheap brand. It's an entire ecosystem. Geely sells a hatchback called the Xingyuan for around $9,500, and it was the best-selling car of any kind in China last year, gas or electric. BYD sells the Seagull, also called the Dolphin Surf, for about $10,200, and it comes with an optional LiDAR sensor for self-driving. Wuling sells a tiny 4-seat EV for $6,500. 3 different companies, 3 different price points, all of them cheaper than a used Toyota Corolla. Who's building these things? And why can't anyone in Detroit, Dearborn, or Stuttgart do the same? To answer that, you have to go back to a small farming village in eastern China in the 1980s, where a teenager named Li Shufu was taking photographs for a living because his family couldn't afford much else. He saved up, bought some basic equipment, and started building refrigerator parts by hand, then motorcycle parts. Then, in 1997, with almost no formal engineering background and a government that didn't think private citizens should be allowed to build cars, he started making cars anyway. People laughed. Regulators ignored him. For years, Geely was treated as a joke next to the state-backed giants, a scrappy motorcycle shop pretending it belonged in the same conversation as companies with government backing and decades of head start. He kept building anyway. Small sedans, cheap hatchbacks, cars nobody in the West had ever heard of, sold to buyers who just wanted something affordable that worked. Then, in 2010, his company bought Volvo, the Swedish automaker, the one that used to make cars for Chinese officials to ride in. Li Shufu, the farmer's son who once assembled refrigerator parts, now owned one of Europe's most respected car brands. That single deal changed everything, because Volvo didn't just hand over a badge, it handed over decades of engineering knowledge. Suddenly, a company built on cheap motorcycles had access to world-class battery management, safety testing, and manufacturing discipline. Li Shufu took that knowledge and pointed it straight at the cheapest, highest volume part of the market. That's how you end up with a $9,000 EV that doesn't feel like a $9,000 car. But the founder's story only explains part of it. The real answer is about a problem America still hasn't solved. Here's the problem.
And it sort of does feel similar to that in China. The price war among Chinese EV makers has been raging for a few years now, and this has played a part in the massive disruption we've seen in China. But the local government has called for an end to the practice, aiming to halt excessive competition and prevent what is known as a race to the bottom among local car manufacturers. Whether or not the war will stop.
Building an EV is expensive because the battery is expensive. For years, that meant cheap electric cars were basically impossible. You'd either get a golf cart with airbags or a bank-breaking Tesla. China solved that with brute force scale. Battery makers CATL and BYD's own battery division now produce lithium iron phosphate cells by the hundreds of millions, driving the cost of the single most expensive part of an EV down further than almost anywhere else on Earth. More than 60 Chinese EV brands are fighting for the same customers, which means nobody can afford to charge a premium. It's the opposite of America, where 3 or 4 legacy automakers can quietly agree the affordable EV isn't worth chasing. Add in cheap steel, cheap labor, government-backed factories, and a domestic market where over half of new cars sold are now electric or hybrid, and you get an industry that treats a $9,000 EV not as a stunt, but as a normal Tuesday product launch. There's a second piece most people miss. In China, over 60 EV brands are fighting inside the same market at the same time, all racing each other on price every single quarter. There's no room for a brand to sit back and coast on reputation. BYD, Geely, Wuling, Xiaomi, and dozens of smaller names are locked in a permanent price war, and the customer is the one who benefits. Compare that to the US, where 3 or 4 legacy automakers effectively set the tone for the entire market, and a 5th player, Tesla, spent a decade convincing people that electric and expensive were supposed to go together. That's not a small difference. That's the entire reason one country ended up with $9,000 EVs and the other one didn't.
I firmly believe that if the BYD Shark was offered in the United States, if it could legally be sold here, you would see almost no Tesla Cybertrucks. You would see far less like F-150s and the mini trucks, Mavericks. This would fill the gap for so many consumers that it's not even funny. They're about $40,000 as pictured.
Now, compare that to the American truck market, because this is where the story gets uncomfortable. The average new vehicle sold in the US hit $51,456 this year. The F-150, America's best-selling vehicle for over 4 decades, starts around $40,000 on paper, but the trim most people actually drive off the lot. Once you add 4-wheel drive, a decent engine, and basic tech, lands closer to $50,000. Go for a loaded Lariat or Platinum, and you're pushing $80,000 for a pickup truck. Let's translate that into something you can actually feel. For the price of one loaded American truck, a buyer in China could drive home 5 brand new electric cars. 5. Not 5 years of payments, 5 separate vehicles, keys in hand, on the same day. Picture it. One driveway in Texas with a single gleaming F-150 parked in it. One driveway in Chengdu with 5 compact EVs lined up bumper to bumper, all paid off, all under warranty, none of them financed for 6 years like the truck next door. That image is the entire story in one frame. Why the gap? Part of it is genuinely different products. A truck that tows 13,000 pounds isn't the same category as a city hatchback, but part of it is that American manufacturers make more profit per truck than almost any other vehicle they build. So there's little financial incentive to chase the cheap end of the market the way Chinese brands are. Trucks are the industry's cash cow. Nobody wants to be the company that undercuts their own golden goose. So while China raced to the bottom on price, Detroit raced to the top on margin. 2 completely different strategies, and only one of them scales to a world where gas prices keep climbing and EV adoption keeps growing. Here's where it gets bigger than just cars.
I think having a massive effect on companies like Porsche even. I mean, you wouldn't think so, would you? But Porsche sales have crashed in China. What about Audi? Same situation. Mercedes-Benz, exactly the same. So it's not just affecting Chinese car manufacturers, it's affecting premium German ones, but it's also affecting Nissan, obviously. Automakers from Japan.
This isn't only happening in hatchbacks. Volkswagen is building a compact electric sedan in China for $11,600, less than half what its own Jetta costs in the United States. Nissan's China-only electric sedan starts around $17,000. Even Western brands, once they're forced to compete inside China's brutal pricing war, suddenly discover they can build a real car for a third of what they charge everywhere else. That's the uncomfortable part. It's not that Chinese engineers know some secret formula Americans don't. It's that American companies have simply never had to try this hard, because nobody's forced them to. Think about what that means for the average American buyer. Right now, an entry-level new car costs more than the median worker's entire annual take-home pay in a lot of states. That's not a market quietly getting more expensive. That's a market pricing out a huge chunk of the people who used to be able to afford it. Meanwhile, in China, someone working a modest factory job can realistically save up and buy a brand new EV outright, in cash, within a year. Same category of buyer, wildly different reality. Now the US and Europe are responding with tariffs, trying to keep these cars out entirely. And that might work for a while. But tariffs don't make trucks cheaper. They just delay the moment American buyers realize what's possible somewhere else and buy time for an industry that's already years behind on price. Which brings us back to where we started. A farmer's son in a small village, laughed at for thinking he could build cars, who ended up owning Volvo and helping trigger a pricing war that's now rattling boardrooms in Detroit. And it's worth remembering, none of this happened overnight. It took decades of getting told no, getting laughed out of rooms, and quietly building anyway. That's easy to skip past when you're staring at a $9,000 price tag. But it's the actual reason this exists. Cheap didn't happen by accident. It happened because someone, decades ago, refused to accept that cars were only ever going to be for people who could afford $40,000, and built steadily toward the opposite instead, one stubborn year at a time. The $9,000 car isn't really about the car. It's proof that the thing Americans have been told is impossible. A cheap, well-built EV was only impossible because nobody with enough scale had bothered to try. So here's the real question worth sitting with. If you could buy a genuinely good electric car for a tenth of the price of a new truck, would you still want the truck? Or is it time American automakers finally got scared enough to compete?